People go to the front of the room and all of a sudden, shh, they might hand the food out. Thank you all for coming. We're still waiting on a couple people, maybe. So I'm part of the Taproom Travelers. My name is Landon. We're a big group. We do YouTube videos mostly. So if you haven't heard of us, go out to YouTube, look up Taproom Travelers, watch our videos. So Aaron here is part of Brew Adventures. I'll let you introduce yourself in just a second. And then, of course, we have Jared from Third and Vine, and we have Eric from Modicum here tonight, too. So Jared from Third and Vine is providing all the food, and Eric from Modicum is doing the beer. So thank you guys for being here, too. And we'll hear more from them as the night goes on. Aaron, if you want to do a little spiel about Brew Adventures.
Sure. Good evening, and thank you for coming. Again, as Landon said, my name is Aaron Black. I'm with Brew Adventures, and my other half, Evelyn Dax, she's the other half of Brew Adventures. So we have a online Facebook and Instagram blog we do with all the different breweries we visit, document them, and post pictures about them. And on top of that, we do some pretty serious home brewing, and we also have a craft beer podcast called Brew Views, and I believe episode number 11 actually featured Eric from Modicum on it. So if you're interested, feel free to go check that out.
We have a sponsor per se tonight. So the Rotary Club is here, and thank all of you guys for being here. We appreciate that. If you guys want to do a little talk about what Rotary is and how people could help, maybe.
Yeah, I'll start, and we'll just kind of go through, introduce ourselves, and I'll just give a quick background. My name's Andy Naborak. I'm the current treasurer of the Chippewa Valley After Hours Rotary Club, a past president, and have been with the club since its inception in 2015.
I'm Nicole Volbrecht. I am the current president of our Rotary Club, and yes, have been with the club since it chartered as well.
I'm Jacob Talladge. I'm the president-elect nominee. I've also been with the club since it chartered as well.
Thank you, and I'm Sarah Grania, and I am the incoming president-elect. So my term will start in July of 2022.
January, you wish. So I got us roped into this, so I was also given the duty of speaking. So I'll just give a real quick rundown on who our club is, what we do. Like we've all kind of said, the club chartered in 2015, March of 2015. And we tried to start this club to be a little bit different than your typical Rotary club. So we're a service organization. Many Rotary clubs were known for meeting over breakfast, over lunch, very typical weekly meeting, do a little service, and that was kind of their deal. We decided to start an evening club for people that maybe couldn't escape during the workday. We didn't serve with a meal, but we welcomed people to purchase alcohol at our meetings. So that was a big draw early on. And we wanted to have less meetings, 2 a month, and basically do shit the rest of the time. So that could be socials, that could be service. We decided on a mission of, providing hunger assistance throughout this area. And we've gotten a lot accomplished in the, 7 years now that we've been in existence. Our big fundraiser is Taste of the Valley. Some of you have maybe been to that down in Phoenix Park. That's where we raise a lot of our funds. All of that stays local. We've really tried to give back to different food organizations in this area, Feed My People, the Community Table, Agnes's Table. We serve a meal once per month at Barnabas Coffee House in Chippewa Falls, and we've provided them with several kitchen upgrades over the years as well. And then every Thanksgiving, another fundraiser that we do is we provide Thanksgiving dinners to families in this area that maybe aren't as fortunate. So we buy all the supplies and the food, and then we deliver it to their house, and they can cook a regular Thanksgiving meal in their own kitchen for the holidays. So this last year we helped 63 families, and I think it was about 315 people. So really proud of that work that we do, and that's where some of those funds go, is they stay local and really help with food in this area. We've done a lot of Kids Against Hunger, meal packing events. We've probably packed 100,000 meals over the years that have gone through Feed My People. So just a quick background on where those dollars go, and part of the proceeds from tonight go towards our efforts. So I want to thank you all for purchasing tickets and helping us with our mission. So enjoy.
Thank you, Andy. So the way the format's going to work tonight is we'll be up here, so that, we'll go through the beer and the cheese pairings, and then we'll do some interview style questions, and then at the end of the night when we're all done eating and drinking and whatever, if you guys have any questions at all for me, which I highly doubt you will because we're not that great, or Aaron, but you might have questions for Aaron.
I'm not that great either.
But you'll definitely have questions for Eric and Jared. So the two guys of the highlights of the night. So if you have any questions for them, we'll take those at the end of the night, and then we'll be done. So let's have fun and enjoy our time.
And feel free to take your cups home with you at the end of the night if you want. Those are for you to take. So
You'll also notice there are cookies. We did not advertise cookies. However, I have an Italian wife and she likes to cook and bake. So she can't attend any event without making something for it because she's Italian. So those are those are pizzelle cookies made with beer. You can eat those whenever. So what's that?
oh yeah, do not eat the cheese right away when we put the
Yeah,
plates down.
so we'll hand the plates out. Yeah, please don't eat the cheese right away. Otherwise, you'll be disappointed when we go through the pairing. You won't get to participate, and you probably won't remember. So trust me, I've been through it before where someone just plowed through their cheese, and they were like, "No, I don't get to participate anymore." So we'll hand the cheese out. I think there's some people that are still filtering in, and then we'll start. The first beer that we poured for you is the Heavens. So that's on the top of your sheets.
You guys are really good not eating all of your cheese.
We checked just to make sure. So the cheese, Jared, is the Hooks, correct?
Correct. It is Hook's Triple Play Extra Innings.
And which one are we looking for on our plate?
So it's going to be the kind of cube-shaped one. Little. Yep. Yeah, you're rectangular, I guess. Not really a cube, but not triangular like the other ones. And then as we go, we'll go counterclockwise. The cheeses will be in the order from there. So yeah, this cheese is a blend of cow, sheep, and goat's milk, aged for a little over a year. I absolutely love it. I think you really get fun notes from each of the milks kind of in different waves. You get that big tangy flavor up front, predominantly from the goat's milk. You get this wonderful kind of herby, earthy flavor in the middle of the palate there from the sheep's milk, and then that really nice, beautiful, nutty, creamy finish from the cow's milk. And paired with a Helles with that bit of maltiness to it, it really makes that nutty finish very, very pronounced, and I just love how it makes it finish.
So Helles, maybe not everybody's familiar with the Helles style of beer. What can you tell us about that?
Sure. So Helles means pale or light in color in German. And we don't mean light as in like American light lager like Bud Light, Coors Light, Miller Lite, where those are low-calorie beers. This is not low-calorie.
What?
Yeah, hard to believe. Craft beer.
I was going to count that as 0 points on Weight Watchers.
I wouldn't recommend that. Yeah, so Helles, especially in southern Germany and Bavaria, is just like the daily beer that you would get if you walked into a beer hall or a pub or a brewery, and you don't speak German and you order a beer. You're more than likely just going to get a glass of Helles because that's what everybody drinks all the time. So Helles is one of my favorite styles of beer, just because it is an everyday drinking beer. It's really, when you think of your like quintessential Bavarian beer drinking experience and you think of sitting in a beer garden with a half liter or a Mosskrug, a full liter Stein, and you're just drinking all day long, this is the beer that is meant for that setting. It is one of the simplest beers you can brew. which actually makes it one of the more challenging styles of beer to make, which is why I love it as a brewer. I love the challenge that this beer presents. And as a beer drinker, I love a beer that I can sit down and have several all afternoon and still be able to function. Drive home, maybe. But yeah, so this beer we brew with 100% imported German ingredients. We import German malt, we import German hops. So it's the barley that we use is a varietal called Barca, which is an heirloom barley varietal that kind of went out of fashion a few years ago because it doesn't have great yield per acre and great disease resistance, so the farmers don't like to grow it. But when the farmers stopped growing it and started growing more modern barley varietals that have better agronomics, better disease resistance, better yield per acre, the brewers started to complain that the more modern barley varietals didn't make better quality beer. So the brewers complained enough that the farmers listened and started growing these kind of heirloom barley varietals like Barca again, and so now we get to brew beer with this fantastic barley. We also use Tettnanger hops. There are kind of two main growing regions in Germany for hops. One is Tettnang and one is the Hallertau. And they both have their own landrace hop varieties that are grown there. Tettnanger is a little bit more herbal and floral, whereas Hallertau tends to be a little bit more citrusy. So this is Tettnanger. Again, very, very subtle hops. It's more about the malt. The hops are just there for, it's just a kiss of hops for balance. So the big flavor notes I get out of this beer would be obviously kind of a very subtle, toasty, biscuity, crackery note from the barley, a little bit of herbaceousness from the hops, especially in the finish. And I get subtle notes of kind of honey and grape nuts are kind of the big barley notes I get out of this beer. And it's finishes dry, finishes crisp, finishes refreshing. Again, it's meant for sitting in a beer garden all day and just throwing back liters.
And obviously for tasting notes wise, whatever you taste doesn't mean it's necessarily wrong though, right? Because everybody might have something different.
Yeah, taste is incredibly subjective. The way your brain processes what's going on in your mouth is differs from everybody, and it can differ from day to day. Even those of us who are trained tasters, who have spent most of our lives developing a palate, I have days where I'll go into the brewery and taste a beer and think, I'm just not tasting well today. And then I'll have days where I go in and it's like, wow, I'm tasting in high definition. And those are dangerous days because those are the days where I call up my wife and I say, honey, we're going out drinking tonight. But yeah.
The palate's on point. We're going.
Exactly. Those are the days where it's fun.
So Helles, you could probably consider that more like what we would call around here sessionable, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, it's meant for drinking a liter at a time.
Yeah.
And Helles is a more approachable beer too for people that walk into a craft brewery and they ask for a Bud Light or Coors Light, which they're not going to get at a craft brewery. This is one of the more obvious selections that you would have them try.
Yeah, definitely. This beer is one of, if not our best-selling beer that we make for a few reasons. It is incredibly drinkable, and you can have several in a sitting, but it's exactly that. We get a lot of people who come into our brewery who aren't necessarily hardcore beer drinkers, and they just want something light, easy drinking. This is a good beer to direct them towards because it is a little bit more flavorful than your average American light lager, but it's still light enough and simple enough that just about anybody can enjoy it.
So when you guys were pairing, for those of you that don't know, Jared and Eric paired all of this stuff. They just sat down one day and decided to try different things, which
Jared did all the work.
I'm jealous. I'm jealous of all that. But so when you guys were thinking about all of the things that you had tried, what made you come up with Helles and this cheese?
We've paired it with some other Helleses. We actually have it paired at the shop right now with one from Working Draft.
Okay.
And it has a very similar effect. we go in. Generally this cheese does really well with anything with a bit of that like kind of biscuity malty stuff to it. Even some darker lagers it'll hold up to pretty well. If they get a little too roasty, it kind of overpowers it a little bit. But we've had good luck. So sometimes you go in with like, these will probably work together, and you taste them and you're like, cool, we were right. And sometimes you go in and they're horribly combative and don't work the way you think they were going to. And this one worked out really nicely, I think.
When Jared talks about the cheese and the beer standing up to each other, that's a really common theme in food pairings in general. I think the most effective food and beer pairings are pairings that you match intensity. Not necessarily flavor notes, but just flavor intensity, which is why oftentimes things like IPAs and spicy food really work well together, because they're very intensely flavored dishes and very intensely flavored beers.
Something really to consider if you decide to do this at home or for your friends or whatever. I know there's been people that have asked me before, and I was like, I don't know, just try stuff. And is that the best way really to do it?
I mean, it's the best way to be certain. Like I said,
Yeah.
we definitely have ideas going into things. We have a lot of luck with certain stouts and certain blues that go really well together. But that combination can be like really bad sometimes when you have a certain blue or a certain stout, or if the stout has the wrong adjuncts in it, and it gets weird fast. So, it's just an excuse to eat cheese and drink beer. I know.
Do you know how long I worked on this pairing?
Yeah, exactly.
I had to drink 30 or 40 different beers. And I went through the whole Woodman section of cheese before I could find anything that I really wanted. How's everybody doing on their beer? Are we getting towards the end? Are we ready for more? Yeah?
I think that's a yes, Landon.
It's Wisconsin.
We need
Of
more
course
beer.
we're ready.
More beer and more cheese.
So there's water there too if you want to rinse your glass out and drink that, or however you want to approach this. To cleanse your palate too, so there's crackers on your plates. There's some nuts if you can have nuts. So we'll walk around and we'll get you your next beer. All right, so what we poured for you is called Little River. It's an American pale ale, and it pairs with the St. Isidore's Bandaged Wrap Cheddar. And if you guys messed around with your cheese, which one is that?
So it's the yellowest of them in color. It'll be right next to where you grabbed the last cheese from, going counterclockwise.
Not orange, yellow. Not orange, yellow.
Yeah, very very pale yellow. It's got yeah.
So this cheese is made by Inga Witcher, right?
It is indeed.
Yeah. Everybody knows Inga Witcher?
Local
celebrity.
It's just a really, really perfect complex cheddar. It's got like beautiful kind of citrusy, almost like pineapple-y flavors. When you cut into a package of it, it just immediately smells of pineapple. You get a little bit of that kind of spicy blue, funky stuff on the edge there, where the bandage is wrapped around. All of those flavors, I think, are really, really great with this beer. I mean, in particular, the kind of citrusy pineapple characteristics that you get out of it are just really nice with it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it was a really perfect match. We tasted this one before it was even finished. It was still in the tank, and I was like, I think this is going to work really good.
Yeah, it works great. Before we get into the beer, Eric, somebody had asked about how to taste beer, the proper way or a great way of tasting beer. So
There's no wrong way.
just
There's no
shoot
wrong
it,
way.
just shoot it and throw it back. Yeah,
There's a difference between drinking and tasting.
sure.
Let's put it that way. So there's a few components that I think you should look for when you're drinking a beer, especially when you're drinking a beer for the first time. or revisiting a beer that you haven't had in a long time, you'd be amazed when you start really paying attention and you start revisiting beers, how different they can taste to you. Your memory is not infallible. So obviously, we judge beer on a few different categories. First is appearance. These glasses are slightly kind of frosted looking, so the appearance is a little hard to judge in these glasses, but there's no wrong appearance, but we do look at things like clarity and head retention, how long the head sticks around. You know, this beer was poured a while ago. There's still some foam sitting on top of the glass. There's lacing, where the head actually sticks to the side of the glass as you drink it down. That is a sign of two things. It's a sign of a well-made beer and a sign of a good, clean glass. If you pour your beer into the glass and the head dissipates immediately and you don't get that lacing effect, then your glass probably has some residual detergent or soap or something in it, or maybe even some grease if it was washed in a dishwasher or something like that. All that stuff is foam negative, so it kills all of the foam. And we want foam. That's something I'm going to talk about a lot tonight. You want foam on your beer. If you've been to our brewery, you know we love to pour lots of foam on our beer, and we get so many complaints about it. But that's the right way to pour beer. We're not trying to rip you off. Our glasses are oversized so that when we pour 2 to 3 fingers of foam on the beer, you're still getting a full measure of beer. But foam is good. Foam, it locks in all of the very volatile aromatic compounds in the beer. So the beer smells better, it tastes better. And I'm not making this up. This has been proven by study after study after study, but even just anecdotally, I can tell you when you pour a good head of beer on the beer, it tastes better, it smells better.
And Eric, what causes a good head and good foam in beer? It's obviously, it goes back to the ingredients as well as how you pour it, correct?
Yeah. Basically, it's a sign of good quality ingredients more than anything else. It's protein is what we're looking at. The foam is protein, and we're pulling that out of the malt. So it means we're not using cheap ingredients. We're not cutting the barley with corn or rice or something like that. That's why American light lagers, the heads tend to dissipate immediately because they're brewed with corn and rice. When you have an all malt, all barley beer or all wheat beer, the head should stick around for a while and be nice, thick, dense, and capture all that aroma for you. After the appearance, we really judge on aroma. Aroma and flavor are so closely linked. That's just how your body works. But my wife does a really good impression of me drinking beer, and I'll tell you it goes like this. Because I swirl and I smell more than I actually drink. But swirling is great. It agitates the beer. It forces carbonation out of the beer, and as the carbonation comes out of the beer, it pops on the surface, and all of those aroma compounds get released into the air, so you can smell them. So agitate your beer, swirl it. It's always good for you. And then stick your nose in it, because the aroma is really, really important. So the aroma I get on this beer first is hops, right? But beyond just hops, what do those hops smell like? And this is the hardest part of tasting. When you're training yourself to taste, the hardest part is not actually tasting, it's putting what you're tasting into words. You have to develop a vocabulary, a tasting vocabulary. So just immediately what I get is grapefruit, just kind of citrus in general, grapefruit, lemon, zest, more zest than actual fruit. A little bit of a tropical kind of pineapple note in there as well. And then there's kind of a kind of dank, resinous, kind of pine character almost, like pine sap. And a bit of a floral note as well, kind of like sticking your face into fresh flowers. So there's a lot going on just from the hops in this beer, and that's all very, very aromatic. The flavor should usually follow the nose, so after you smell it, you want to give it a taste. And when you taste, there's a few different ways I like to taste. The first taste I do, I'll just take a sip and go right down the hatch. And then my second taste, I will really agitate. I call it chewing on my beer. I really just swish it around and cover the whole surface of your mouth. That's going to do a few things for you. And you'll notice if you just take a sip and go right down the hatch and then really chew on the beer and agitate it, it's going to taste completely different. And when you chew on it, what you're doing, again, is you're popping more of those carbonation bubbles. You're going to get more of the bitterness when you chew on it, especially in the finish. That kind of lingering bitterness is going to come out more as you agitate the beer. You're going to get a feel for how carbonated the beer is. Is it prickly like champagne, or is it lower level of carbonation, a little softer and rounder in your mouth? And then when you think of flavor, think of it in terms of a progression. You're going to taste some things right away, and then you're going to taste some other things in the middle, and then in the finish you'll get more different lingering flavors, and it kind of progresses throughout as it goes down your throat. So right up front, I get this kind of really intense grapefruit citrus kind of character. And then in the middle, I get more of the barley malt, that kind of toasty, biscuity kind of thing. And then in the finish, I get that kind of pine sap, pine resin, kind of bitter finish. But it's not all at once. You kind of taste them one after the other.
What kind of hops are giving you those flavors, Eric?
So this beer is 100% Mosaic hops. If you're not familiar with Mosaic, it is a very aptly named hop varietal because it tastes like a million different things. It's a really, really complex hop. So the flavors and aromas in hops come from the oil content. As the hops grow, the lupulin glands in the flowers produce these oils, and the oils are going to give you different flavors. And Mosaic has a very, very complex oil content, lots of terpenes and things like that. And because it has so many different flavor compounds present in it, it can change wildly from place to place where it's grown or year to year. This term terroir, is, if you're a wine drinker, you're probably very familiar with the term terroir. It comes from the French wine industry, and it explains why wine grapes grown in one region differ vastly from wine grapes grown in another region. That's why Cabernet Sauvignon grown in Bordeaux tastes completely different from Cabernet Sauvignon grown in Napa Valley. But it can be even more localized than that. I mean, you go to Bordeaux, the terroir of one winery or one vineyard can be very different from the one right across the street from it, because they'll have different slopes on their hills and different sun exposures and all that kind of stuff. So it's terroir is basically how the climate, the microclimate, the soil, all that stuff in a certain area changes the agricultural products grown in that area. And it doesn't just apply to wine. It happens in coffee. It happens in hops. It happens in barley. So honey, any agricultural product, really. And Mosaic, because it's such a complex hop, really changes from place to place, farm to farm, year to year, which makes it a really interesting hop to brew with, because you really never know what you're going to get out of it.
So this is an American pale ale. What makes that different from an India pale ale?
So I like to think of pale ale as a family of beers. Yeah. And within the pale ale family, you've got a few different styles. You've got styles like IPA, India Pale Ale. You've got American Pale Ale. You've got English Pale Ales like Bitter. Bitter, by the way, is probably the least bitter of those three styles. Years and years ago, there were kind of two styles of ale brewed in the UK. One was called mild and one was called bitter. And mild was mild because it wasn't bitter, and bitter was bitter because it was bitter. But by modern beer standards, not very bitter. Beer has gotten progressively more and more bitter as we've gone on. So an American Pale Ale was kind of the, I want to say, prototypical American craft beer style. If you look at a lot of the breweries that really kicked off craft beer in the United States, breweries like Sierra Nevada, for instance, Sierra Nevada Pale Ale is the original American craft beer. And it's a relatively hoppy beer style, but lower in alcohol and slightly less hoppy, less intense in flavor than an IPA would be.
And what's Little River named after?
Oh, yeah. Good question. So this is a new beer. We just came out with this a week ago, 2 weeks ago. I don't even remember. Very recently. My wife and I just adopted a puppy. Her name is River, and this beer was brewed in honor of her adoption. So. I have lots of pictures. I'll show you later.
I believe there's a Facebook post too. If you go to Modicum's Facebook page, you can see Little River on there.
What does everybody think? Pretty good? Yeah? Should we move on? Yes? Everybody? Yeah? Okay. Especially for this next one, I would definitely recommend that you swish with water a little bit. If you need more water, we have more. This next beer is definitely not going to blend very well with an APA. So this next cheese is also a local cheese. Thorpe is somewhat local, right?
Yeah. I mean, we try to keep most of our cheeses from the region. We do predominantly Wisconsin and Minnesota. When we get to the last one, there's some things that just are not replicated here. So, we reach out to France and Spain a little bit, but mostly
Quick show of
region.
hands, too. Who's been to Third and Vine already? Nice. Yeah. Yeah, who's part of the cheese club? Yeah. There's a few. There's a cheese club.
There is indeed a cheese club.
We'll save
yeah.
that. We'll save that for the end. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. You can sign up for a little membership, and once a month on the second Wednesday of the month, we give you a couple of special cheeses and a little locally made accompaniment that we think complements the cheese very well. And you also get 10% off on pickup day. So if you want to grab some beers to go with it, you get a little discount and get a bunch of background and information about the cheese and the cheese makers. And we highlight like a pretty good amount of local cheeses and cheese makers through that too. We've had a few that we've already done through the club that just placed really well in the recent cheese competition down in Madison. So it was kind of fun to see some things that we've gotten out to people and be like, yeah, we we had a bunch of landmark go out already. So yeah. Absolutely.
So this one, I have never been able to pronounce her name correctly.
Marike is
it Marike?
As far as I know.
I've heard about 4 different pronunciations of it, and I've been told I've been wrong every time.
I haven't been fortunate enough to meet her yet, so maybe I'll be corrected at some point.
Okay.
Hopefully.
Yeah. But she's of Dutch descent, right?
The legend has it that she came to the States and was upset that nobody knew how to make proper Gouda, and then returned back to learn how to do it well, and then came back to show us all how it's done, and repeatedly does it, as she is a ridiculously decorated cheesemaker.
Yeah.
She makes legitimately some of the best Gouda, or if you're Dutch, you Gouda, Gouda to the rest of us.
Yeah.
You
got to keep it simple in America. Yeah.
Makes some of the best in the world.
Yeah.
This is her young version. I definitely lean more towards the more heavily aged stuff for my palate, but with this beer, the really creaminess that you get out of this, I really enjoyed with it. I think the cheese, Eric mentioned earlier, a lot of times you're just kind of matching intensity and flavors. I think this was one of the instances where two things that hit on some similar notes actually kind of went really well together. They're both very kind of bright and have the little tanginess to them. They both have little kind of hints of caramelly flavors hidden beneath all those other things, and I think they just combined really nicely.
Yeah. And so the beer we have, Eric,
yes,
is a sour, but it's not a Flemish. It's a Flemish-ish.
Flemish-ish. It's kind of Flemish. Least popular beer name I've ever come up with.
Oh, it's like my favorite.
It's my favorite too.
I think it's fantastic.
But yeah, the name stops a lot of people from buying it. I have to keep reminding people that phlegm is spelled with a PH and a G in there. No, Flemish as in from Flanders is what Flemish means. So the Flanders region of Belgium. It's my approximation of a Flemish red ale. So if you've ever had, I think probably the most famous and most readily available in the States Flemish red ale would be Rodenbach, Rodenbach Grand Cru. If you haven't had Rodenbach, I highly suggest you go seek it out because it is a world-class beer.
We've got a really beautiful American version at the shop, too, from Cascade.
Awesome.
They're Northwest Flanders.
Sweet. Go to his shop. So I love Flemish red ale. It's one of my favorite sour styles of beer, and it's sours have become increasingly popular in the beer world over the last handful of years. But modern American craft beer sours are very different from the more traditional sours. A lot of modern craft beer sours feature a ton of fruit, tend to be sweet and sour at the same time, which can be good, but can also be really cloying and slightly offensive to your palate, especially if you want to drink for long periods of time. Those cloying sweetness kind of just builds up on your palate as you drink it. But more traditional styles of sour, things like lambic or Flemish reds, are, again, there's no fruit in this beer. It's just barley, hops, water, yeast, and bacteria. So
Good bacteria.
Good bacteria.
Yeah, good bacteria. Yeah.
I mean, you can't make cheese without bacteria, and you can't make this without bacteria. The reason we call it Flemish-ish is, first of all, I'm a big believer in giving credit where credit is due. I don't ever say that I make German beer. I don't ever say I make Belgian beer. I make German-inspired beer. I make Belgian-inspired beer. Our brewery's here in Altoona, so we're obviously not in Germany. We're not in Belgium. So it's Flemish-ish. It's kind of Flemish. Your traditional concept of what a Flemish red ale is really is based around Rodenbach, because they are, without a doubt, the largest exporter of sour ale in Flanders. And the Rodenbach technique is very simple. They make a very malty, caramely red ale, and then they ferment it in stainless with yeast. So it's a clean fermentation. At that point, it's not sour yet. And then they transfer it into these huge wooden tanks called foeders. They're oak tanks, and the tanks themselves are inoculated with bacteria. So wood, being porous, harbors bacteria very, very well, which is why most modern brewers have gone away from brewing in oak tanks hundreds of years ago. But if you want to make sour beer, oak is a really, really good vessel for doing that because it harbors bacteria very well. So they transfer this clean, caramely red ale and then put it in the oak tanks, and over the course of 1 to 3 years, it goes slowly sour as the bacteria start working on the beer. The bacteria will break down the sugars even further than the yeast could and start to produce lactic and acetic acid, which is what makes the beer tart and sour. As it ages, it will get more and more sour and more complex, until eventually, if you let it go long enough, it just turns into malt vinegar, which is not good. Well, it's great if you want to cook with it, but it's not good for drinking.
Great for your fish.
Yeah, really good on fish, or French fries. So Rodenbach makes a handful of different beers, but they're all the same beer. It's just different blends of aged beer. So their Grand Cru is mostly 3-year aged with a little bit of 2-year and a little bit of 1 year, and they make various blends of the different ages.
And you do some aged sours, right?
We
have
do.
done it in the past, yeah.
Yes, we do plenty of barrel-aged, oak-aged sours. This is not one of those. which is my favorite thing about this beer. It is incredibly complex. You would think it was aged in oak. In fact, I've had other brewers talk to me and say, man, how long did you age that in oak for? And the answer is, I didn't age it in oak at all. It just picked up some really beautiful complexity. It was only aged in a stainless tank. But it's a really good fake Flemish red, which is why it's Flemish-ish.
Yeah. And not to be judged by color. So, there are some people that judge beer purely by color.
What does color taste like?
Well, I have a stepmom that will not drink anything because it's dark in color. I won't like that. I won't even try it.
Yeah, that's
What would you say to somebody like that?
That's a horrible way to live your life. No offense to your stepmother.
No, none taken. I tell her the same thing.
She's not here.
No,
Yeah,
no. She's in South Dakota. She's really far away.
And Flemishes are typically a red, dark amber type color, correct?
Yeah, red to brown
Yeah.
in color. Yes. So color in beer comes from, well, unless it's pink or something. If it's pink, it's coming from fruit or some other thing. But beyond weird colored beers like pink and blue and green, color comes from the malt. So we have barley malt, and you dry it in a kiln. And when you dry it at a low temperature, it doesn't develop any color, and so the beer is very pale. And then if you dry it at a higher temperature, it starts to toast, basically. It's the same process that happens to a piece of bread when you stick it in the toaster. It starts to brown. And that's where you get these kind of amber, red, brown colors. And then you can take it even further. You can roast the barley in basically a drum roaster, like a coffee roaster. And that's where you can get black colors. And the flavors associated with barley malt come from that drying and roasting process. So when you dry it at a low temperature, you get that not a lot of color, not a lot of flavor. You get, that kind of vaguely toasty, biscuity flavor. And then when you roast or toast it at a higher temperature and you start getting amber color, you'll get more of that kind of bread crust and really intense bready flavor. And you could even get into kind of the caramel and toffee kind of flavors. And then when you roast it, you get the same effect that happens to a coffee bean when you roast it. You get that kind of dark baker's chocolate or espresso or coffee flavor. But that's the only reason beer is darker or lighter. It's the temperature that the malt was dried at. A lot of people think, well, it's dark, so it's going to be bitter. Well, that's not true. That's just not true at all.
Would you say the best way, like when you're picking out a beer in the grocery store and you're certain that it's probably a dark beer and you're not really sure that you're going to like it, probably just look at the ingredients and see what's actually in it?
Yeah, well, especially today because there are lots of adjuncts used in
Yeah.
brewing beer.
Yeah.
I mean, you could get a beer that has marshmallow fluff in it if you want.
What?
They don't do that, do they?
No.
So yeah, look at the ingredients. But when it comes to more traditional beer styles, color is not a good indicator of flavor at all. Yeah.
Cool. Well, as we move into our last beer, that's perfect because our last beer is an amber lager. So what you'll be looking for, obviously, is an amber color. Correct? Yeah. It's not just
As long as I didn't screw it up.
We'll find out.
So suspenseful.
We are moving on to my absolute most favorite cheese in the entire world. So when I saw that Jared put this on the menu, I was super pumped. And I know it's not made here in the U.S., but I am super thrilled that you were able to get this cheese ever.
Yeah, it's real.
Yeah.
It's real special. It's not like the easiest cheese to get, but we have brought it in a few times. It also, every time that we brought it in previously, we were lucky enough to have some of Eric's beer on tap. So we have paired this with two of your beers before, actually. We paired it with the idiom and with the exclamation, and it went just wonderfully with both of them. This is a French cheese. It is cave aged. They do a few different ages of it. This is the older age, so this is aged 18 months. You have a little bit of the rind on your piece there. It kind of makes it look like a cantaloupe when you see the rind and the cheese together. It is aged or formed into a little ball that kind of resembles a little cannonball. And then a whole bunch of mites live on the outside of it, and that's what gives it its kind of little pockmarked and craggy look. They are called cheese mites. You don't have any on your cheese at this point. The U.S. has very strict rules on importing them. They actually, I think somewhere around like 6 years ago, refused a absolutely ludicrous amount of it. Just thousands of pounds of it were wasted because it like very marginally exceeded the whatever 3 mites per cubic foot or whatever allowance they have for it to be imported.
But they let us eat Twinkies.
Yeah, I know
that's
it's
okay
it's
though.
baffling.
Yeah.
It's baffling.
Yeah.
But yeah, just a wonderful cheese. It really transforms if you start by eating the lighter colored portion. That's kind of where your piece will come to a point, and then as you eat closer to the rind, it really transforms. You basically end up with 2 cheeses on your plate with a chunk of this. It starts off kind of cheddary in the softer, lighter colored portion, and as you work your way towards that rind, it gets really complex, nutty, earthy, just really, really rich flavors. The rind itself doesn't have much flavor, and the texture isn't my favorite in the world, but the pieces of cheese right up against it are for my palate, like the best parts of it. I think it's just fantastic.
And this cheese is extremely hard to cut, right?
Yeah, so that rind is like a rock. So once you get into the center, it's pasty and it's softer and it's easier to cut. But that initial breaking through it is pretty tough. You got to really lean into it.
I think I just saw a video on YouTube about the most dangerous cheese to cut or whatever. And
Well,
it was Mimolette.
It doesn't help that it's shaped like a ball,
Right.
so it like kind of likes to roll on you while you're trying to cut it too. And
Yeah.
But yeah, a really special cheese. There's nothing like it in the world. It initially was made because they were trying to make Edam in France, and then it's slowly evolved and like absolutely become its own thing, and is pretty far from Edam at this point. But that's what its intention was at first, and now it's developed into this beautiful, wonderful cheese.
Simply amazing. Yeah.
I'm going to ask a really stupid, nerdy question, but does the difference between the center of the ball versus the rind, the flavor difference, is that just due to oxidative effects mostly?
It's like, it's drier on the
Yeah.
outside. Yeah, it's just, it's retained all that moisture, and yeah, exactly.
So yeah, if you've never had Mimolette before, just keep your eyes open to when it actually comes down to Third and Vine, and then wait until I go and have it, and then you can come
Well,
and get whatever is left over.
we've got a little bit left of this ball there right now, and then we have a second one because it comes 2 at a time when we order it. So we've got the other one to cut into this week probably,
Sweet.
paired with a really great Czech dark lager from Fair State.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to be there.
So amber lager, Eric.
Amber lager.
Seems relatively simple.
Yep,
Yeah.
it sure does. I love this beer. This is one of my favorites. Also one of our best sellers. Like the Helles, it's simple beer, which is what I love. Simple beers. It's kind of what we specialize in. A lot of craft beer today kind of screams at you from the glass, like screams for your attention, and I find that those beers tend to be one-dimensional and boring. I like beers that have layers of complexity, but it's subtle in its complexity, and I love, when you have to go searching for it a little bit, it's, I think, a more rewarding drinking experience. So I love simple beer. I've always said that, I haven't always said. At some point in my life, I hadn't said this, but for a while now, I've been saying that I think a world-class beer is greater than the sum of its parts. And I'm sure there are a lot of people who don't agree with me on this, but for me anyway, a world-class beer is greater than the sum of its parts. And what I mean by that is we start with 4 basic, simple ingredients: barley, water, hops, and yeast. And none of those ingredients on their own would even suggest anything remotely like what's in your glass. But when combined together, through the magic of fermentation, you end up with something that's elevated and is even better than any of those things combined in any other way could be. I don't know how many of you spend a lot of time munching on barley or hops. It's not that delicious. It really isn't. I do it all the time. It's my job. But so when I say it's greater than the sum of its parts, what I'm trying to actually say is I'm excluding beers that aren't greater than the sum of their parts. So when you put a ton of raspberry puree into your beer, of course that beer tastes like raspberries. That's not interesting to me. It might be delicious, but it's not interesting. When you have a beer that tastes like raspberries, but there were no raspberries added to that beer, it's just a combination of malt and hops and yeast that give you the flavor of raspberries, that to me is fascinating. And those are the kind of beers that I love to drink and love to search out. And I find that those beers tend to be not one-dimensional, but layered in their complexity. And as you drink an entire glass, like he was talking about the cheese, how it changes from the center to the rind, from the top to the bottom of the glass. You'll have a wildly different experience, which is why I'm not a huge fan of drinking beer just a few ounces at a time. I like to have a full glass, if not two, of a beer before I even make a judgment about that beer, because he's got to warm up. Yeah. I always say that there are a lot of 12-ounce curls on the road to connoisseurship. And so amber lager is one of those styles. It's very simple on the surface. It's just a slightly darker lager. Not that interesting. But when you start to dig into it, you start to realize there's layers. There's this bread crust note, and I'm talking like fresh bread crust right out of the oven for those of you who bake. You know exactly what I'm talking about. We call that melanoidin. That's that kind of bread crusty character. You get the dough character as well, but you also get a little bit of tartness in the finish. Not tart like the last beer we had, but there's a little bit of acidity and crispness in the finish. There's a little bit of herbaceousness from the hops, and all of that kind of melts together to create something that I think is elevated and an upper echelon kind of beer for my palate anyway. It's not one-dimensional. At the same time, it's complex, but you can drink a lot of it. It's relatively low in alcohol. It is crisp and clean in the finish. And drinkability is a term that gets thrown around a lot in the beer industry. And it sounds like a made-up BS marketing term, but it really isn't. Drinkability is a real thing. And it's really hard to achieve as a brewer. Drinkability is really, really difficult to come by. It takes really close attention to detail when it comes to ingredients and process. The brewing process is a very complex, long process to get from raw ingredients to finished product. And in that time, you can make a lot of mistakes. And anytime you make a mistake, you are sacrificing drinkability. So to achieve a beer that you can have not one, not two, but maybe 3 or 4 of and still want more is really, really difficult to do. And it's a challenge that I, as a brewer, take very seriously. And these types of beers, these simple, subtle, nuanced beers, lend themselves really, really well to high levels of drinkability. And that's what I love. As a brewer and a person who sells beer for a living, but also as a lover of beer, I've never understood the point of a beer that you only want to have one of. It just doesn't make any sense to me. I really like drinking beer. So I want to have a couple of beers. I don't want to have just one. So for me as a brewer, kind of my whole raison d'etre, the reason I started this brewery in the first place was to pursue these types of beers that have a high level of drinkability, beers that you want to have more of.
We talked about the color of beer and how simple this idiom amber lager is. What gives it that amber color? We also talked about the different roasted malts. I'm assuming one of those roasted malts is what gives it this amber color.
Yeah, so there's no roasted malt in here, but there is some highly kilned malts. So
Kilned.
yeah, so we're not talking about like roasted like black, but we're talking about like rye toast color, you know, aggressively dried. Yes. So the color thing is we keep coming back to it, so I'm just going to tell this story, and I apologize. I talk a lot when I drink.
It's really good you're filling the time. It's
That's
great.
good.
Everyone's eating it up, Eric. Keep
All
going.
right. Well, when they start walking out, I'll shut up. No, so a lot of people don't realize this because when you think of beer, when you think of basic beer, you think of pale, yellow, fizzy stuff, right? That's what everybody, when you think beer, that's what comes to mind. All of these darker beers are fancy beers, right? But this pale beer thing is a very, very modern invention. Beer has been made for centuries. Thousands and thousands of years, human beings have been making beer. And up until just a couple hundred years ago, all beer was dark. It had to be, because, as I said earlier, color comes from the drying process when you dry barley malt. And until the Industrial Revolution and the invention of the forced air kiln, malt was dried over fire. And as you can imagine, fire is a very difficult thing to control. And so the malt was dark. Beer was brown to black in color for almost all of beer's history. It was also smoky. So if you've ever had smoked beers before, I love smoked beers. Most people hate smoked beers, which is a shame because they are amazing.
It is a real shame. So good.
But up until relatively recently in human history, all beer was dark and smoky, and probably was sour as well, because it was made in oak tanks and not in shiny stainless steel vessels with industrial grade sanitizers like we have today. So it was right around the beginning of the 1800s, newer kilning techniques were being developed, and beer was getting progressively paler and paler. And by that I mean it started out going from brown to light brown. That was a revolutionary step in the history of beer, and people freaked out. They were like, oh my God, why is this beer so light? And they wanted more of it. It had a different flavor profile. It looked different. But beer back then was not really nice to look at, and glass wasn't all that prevalent, so most people drank out of stone or pewter mugs, so the appearance of the beer wasn't that important, but the color, the flavor of the beer was really important. And as you go through the 1800s, beer kept getting paler and paler and paler. The British took huge steps forward by inventing the forced air kiln. Their beers got paler, and now we're getting more into the amber category. And then, so like for instance, British pale lager or British pale ale is not pale, it's amber in color. But that's what pale meant in the early 1800s was this kind of copper color. And then the brewers in Vienna started brewing, malting even paler stuff. If you've ever had a Vienna lager, it's like a copper colored. This is more like the color of a Vienna lager, like a light copper colored beer. And then in the mid 1840s, a brewer by the name of Josef Groll. He's a Bavarian by birth, but was hired to brew at a brewery in the Czech Republic in a city called Pilsen. You're probably all familiar with the style of beer called Pilsener. Was invented by this guy named Josef Groll, who was brewing beer at a brand new brewery that had just been built. It was built for a very important reason. The beer in Pilsen was terrible. And the people actually revolted. There were riots in the streets about the quality of the beer. They were like, the beer everywhere else is great. Why is our beer so terrible? That just says something about the Czechs. The Czechs take their beer very seriously. We're both Czech, so we know. So the city, the government, the rich aristocrats in town got together and said, we've got to do something about this uprising. The people are going to burn the city down. So a lot of the wealthy and elite of the town banded together and built a brand new state-of-the-art high-tech brewery with a brand new malting facility. They hired a Bavarian brewer because at the time the Bavarians were considered the best brewers in the world. And Josef Grohl came to the city of Pilsen and malted the palest barley anyone had ever seen before and made the world's first golden-colored beer, Pilsner. But that was in the mid-1840s. That's not that long ago in terms of the history of beer. So beer throughout history has just gotten paler and paler and paler and paler. And it was around that same time that glass became more widely available. The Bohemian glass blowers were famous throughout the whole world for the quality of their glass. So not only was this pale beer being made in Bohemia, but the glass was being made there too. And suddenly this pale golden colored beer, this high-tech pale golden colored beer swept across Europe. People went crazy for it. And fast forward to today, it's now the most widely brewed, widely enjoyed style of beer in the world.
And now we have Keystone Light.
Exactly.
The palest beer ever. Yeah. Who knew that we could get so pale?
More proof that too much of a good thing is not always a good thing.
Yeah.
And our next pour is Keystone Light, just to let you know.
We'll just wash everything down with Keystone. We got
That's actually what's in the water bottles, right, Landon?
yeah. we got 2 30-pack of Stones for about $12. It was a hell of a deal. So that's kind of the end of the tasting notes part of it. Does anybody have any questions as far as anything, really? Nothing really goes. I mean, you can throw anything out there.
Jared, what do the cheese mites add to the mimolette other than maybe a little protein?
My understanding is they sort of the mites themselves are like eating different bacterias, and they kind of regulate what gets to take part in forming that cheese, and that's so getting rid of the ones you don't want and keeping the ones you do, and that's kind of what gives it its flavor is my understanding. But in addition to, as you said, kind of donating some protein.
Protein's important. Yeah.
There's a German cheese that's not allowed to come to the States that is just densely covered with cheese mites, and because of it, all the things they leave behind, it is quite black in color. Ooh. And it was
Are you talking about mite waste?
Yeah, mite waste. Yeah. And
we don't need to go any further into that.
Yeah. Apparently, this cheese was almost lost to the ages about like 40 years ago because there was like one person still making it, and some guys took it upon themselves to learn from this little old lady how to continue making this cheese, and it's a local delicacy in some tiny part of Germany.
It's kind of like Limburger is the Wisconsin, right?
But way more localized.
Yeah.
It's like a town in Germany, basically.
I think for a while Monroe was the only one that was making Limburger. Right?
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, I think so.
Wow.
I'm not even from Wisconsin, and I know that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Anybody else? All right. Well, we have this place until I think 10, so we're not going to rush you out. If you guys want to ask questions and come up and ask Eric and Jared questions, you can. Yeah. Do I think we'll do more Tuesday tastings? Yes, probably in the fall. Things are starting to pick up as far as everybody's going on vacation and those kinds of things. So when we look at it again, we'll probably look towards the fall.
There's other stuff to do coming up soon, and so we'll fill the dead months when we're all stuck inside.
That's typically what we try to do. We try to fill the dead months when nobody else has anything else to do.
Yeah, we wanted to actually have this in February, but it just didn't work out. But
right.
The cold months tend to be better. People.
Right.
Yeah, it is not very nice outside. If you guys noticed when you were coming in, so.
Do you have something, Nate? There was once a time. You're going to ask about a bus again, aren't you? Yeah, we used to do bus tours too. There again, if we ever figure out a way to do it, we'll put it on social media. So
talk to Evelyn about that.
So the best way to find out what we're doing is just to follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, all those types of places, even Twitter somewhat. we'll post on all those places whenever one of these events comes up. Other than that, make sure that you visit Third and Vine. You guys are open Tuesday through Sunday, correct?
We are closed Tuesday.
No,
we're,
let's
so
say
we're open
Monday.
Wednesday through Monday, I guess,
Yeah,
is
okay.
what you would say.
And then what are the hours?
We're open 2 to 9 most days. We close at 10 on Friday, Saturday.
Okay.
Open a little earlier on Sunday.
Sure.
So for your day drinking needs on a Sunday.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
And then Modicum is open
Tuesday through Sunday.
Tuesday through Sunday.
Yep, we open at 3 on weekdays and noon on Saturday.
Yeah.
And I would stop in a few weeks. Our homebrew club last Saturday helped Eric brew a delicious wit beer that will be on tap, 2 to 3 weeks?
Probably 2 weeks from now. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, so be sure to stop in and give that a try.
Yeah, otherwise, like I said, just make sure you check all of us out on social media, because we post whatever we're doing, all the new things that are coming out and all of that stuff. But other than that, thank you all very much for coming out tonight. We appreciate you trusting us with an event, and we hope to put on another one in the future.
And I'd like to give a real quick thank you to my coworker, Mike Kircher, for printing off these menus and printing off the signs, and to Evelyn for designing all of them. So thank you, guys.
And thanks again to the Rotary, those guys in the
Yes.
back. Thank you.